if we don't lead in this space, someone's going to start dictating terms for us.
One of the things I would definitely recommend is that you have a philosophical approach to AI. It's not just a piece of technology, right? It embodies meaning.
We have to be responsible for the things that we're utilising, and the buck stops with us.
Welcome to the Global Missional AI podcast, where faith meets technology and where we explore how innovation can serve the kingdom of God. My name is Joshua Seal, and I serve as the Director of Global Missional AI. We're going to do something different the next few weeks. We'd love to share a few of the talks from the Global Missional AI London event. We just had some incredible conversations. We will be sharing those on this feed. We do want to say thank you to our partner, Glue, who helps enable this podcast and the summit happen. Glue is the technology platform for the faith ecosystem, providing value-aligned AI and comprehensive solutions for ministry leaders. Visit gloo.com to find out more. We hope you enjoy these next few weeks and these episodes, and we'll see you a little bit later in the summer.
To try and frame a little bit about who's in the room, I hope many of you have met one another during the coffee breaks, and I'm sure many of you have come with friends or have seen colleagues from across lots of different walks of life. But one of the unique things that we've experienced in the past couple of years at this conference and others, in this kind of stream, both in Dallas and Orlando over the past couple of years, as well as also this event, is that this is a real meeting of the kind of AI community, but you come from many different places. And this will be slightly oversimplistic to reduce it down to this, but I wonder if just by a show of hands, if you would raise to one of these two categories, if you would see yourself in the room as someone who is working with AI in a missional context, would you raise your hand in a moment? And then if you are, would you see yourself the other way around, which is that you are on a mission in the AI field or technology more generally? So for those of you who would see yourself maybe in that first camp, that you're in a missional team, okay, and for those of you that are in the second camp, okay, so maybe just a slight split there. I'd say Joshua's looking at me as to try and make some judgment of that. I think it's 70-30 probably for those of you that on a mission. So I think that's helpful, because one of the big things that this panel is trying to address, and with these experts who I'll have introduced themselves in a moment, is the real challenge that we're hearing from a lot of those of you that are in missional contexts, which is, how do we do this well? All right, I think we are well past the point of trying to understand what AI is, although we've had some illuminations today that I think help us think about that more deeply. I think we are past the point of saying that it is something we can or cannot choose to engage with. I think we're all here because we believe it is something we should engage with. But how do we do that well? And where do we look for that guidance seems to be the conversation that we continually are raised up to. And so we put this panel together really to try and help address some of that, which is, where can we look for some of the standards, the guidance, the structure that might be needed for us to bring AI into our organizations and do that well, and to tread the balance that I think John has so eloquently captured in the past half an hour or so, which is that we don't want to leave the opportunities on the table that this technology presents for the spreading of the gospel and for mission. But we also want to hold back the potentially difficult consequences of leveraging this technology, both in the spiritual and in the practical dimension. And that's why we're bringing this conversation together. So I'm joined by three wonderful friends I'm glad to have here with us. We have Patricia Shaw to my left, Yvonne Carson in the middle, and Alwyn Daniel from CV at the end. I'll have each of them just quickly give a 1-minute introduction to themselves, and then I'll come first for you, Trish.
So I'm Patricia Shaw, I'm CEO of Beyond Reach, and I'm an AI data ethics and governance consultant. I'm by background a lawyer, so there are law graduates and there are hopeful law graduates as well. And I've been working in the AI governance space for the last 6-7 years, and particularly being advisor to the IEEE, which is the global standards body. And
sorry, switch mics. There you go.
Sorry about that. Now you can hear me. Yeah. Expert advisor to the IEEE Global Standards Body, and also advisor to a variety of intergovernmental organisations like the Council of Europe, the OECD and the UN.
Just a few credentials. Yvonne, would you? We met you briefly earlier, but maybe if you could speak to your context within this particular conversation.
Absolutely. So my name is Yvonne Carson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Global Media Outreach. So when I approach the AI conversation, I look at it in a couple different ways. First of all, I am an engineer by background. I'm an IEEE gal, Computer Society. So I've lived my life by standards. I worked in the medical device industry. So standards have been an important part of my life, and I see the need for them here. But as I now serve in the church, I serve in a ministry, I see that standards don't quite get us all the way, right? There's something much, much more, and it's that theological framework that we need to understand as well. So I can't say that I'm just an engineer anymore. I have to be a theologian and engineer, because the way God has shaped and formed me will ultimately impact what I create.
And Alwyn?
I'm Alwyn Daniel. I lead engineering and research at Christian Vision. We've been doing AI for the last 8 or 9 years. We've had strong foundations in data, in establishing the foundations and the frameworks around data. So we're all set to move forward with AI and see how AI can impact missions in a positive way. With regards to standards, being a technologist, I like pushing the standards, and but at the same time, I also value and understand why we need those standards. So I believe this conversation is going to help us get deeper into some of those aspects.
Fantastic. Well, I suppose to kind of start this off, Trish, I might ask you, I think for some people in the room, the word standards might sound maybe too standard for others, but there's a lot to this. Could you just give us a little bit of a definition of, like, what does good standards look like in this space? You've been helping frame many of them.
So I'm going to start with from a framing of law, which I come from. So when we see a problem space, when something perhaps is not ethical or not acceptable in society, we need some kind of regulation generally. And that then brings about a standardised approach often to a technology or to a way of life. So we've already mentioned medical devices. Thankfully, there are laws regarding medical devices, and there are also standards. But the law can only take us so far. It can't be hugely prescriptive. It has to be quite high level. So this is where we have industry often involved with helping create standards. So these aren't lawmakers, these are industry bodies, often expert in the field, bleeding edge, literally. I've been reliably informed that standards regarding the critical infrastructure that we use in terms of electronics, actually the standards that were brought by the industry were brought to the government makers and to the lawmakers to then make law about how we then go about regulating such technology as electricity that we all know and love today and couldn't really live without. And so, to that end, standards are in our everyday midst, and they're a part of how law is translated often. And sometimes the law doesn't exist. Perhaps sometimes they're precursor to law that help regulate and standardise, for want of a better word, what we see and how we do. So they bring about a lot of safety. They bring about a lot of security for us, but they also help embed values. And I would say that there's an opportunity here in regards to ethics and the ethical approaches and the responsible approaches that mimic and have regard to what we want to see as a society. So a lot of standards up until now have been very technical. And so you need really, really technical people in the room, people who understand the engineering of something, the manufacture of something. And, we go back to medical devices in that regard. But what we're starting to see is a branching out of socio-technical standards because of AI. And AI being a data-driven software that actually having an impact on every one of our lives. It's having a societal impact. It's having an individual and a group level impact. And so to that end, this is how I've got involved with standards as a lawyer, implementing soft law and thinking about actually not just what this technology is doing for us and what it's doing to us in terms of that societal impact and really having an outcomes focus. So really recognising that. So hence standards is all around us. And the chairs you're very much sitting on are probably standardised as well.
So we kind of have the law, as you say, and then we have these kind of standard frameworks that emerge. One of the problems with both of them, though, and particularly with a field like AI, is they're always playing catch-up because the technology outpaces the lawmakers, it outpaces the industry bodies, and it certainly outpaces for most of us as individuals and companies, like, well, what are we supposed to do about this? So in that kind of space where things aren't that certain, Yvonne, Alwyn, for you, when you're thinking about trying to put structure and safety around AI inside of ministries, How do you go about that when these don't always exist?
Well, I think this is where we can go back to the principles of Scripture, right? So this may sound like a kind of, something that you would say, well, everybody understands this. There's wisdom in the multitude of counselors. So when I come against a problem that is maybe new and emerging, I'm praying, I'm seeking people to have that debate with. And then I'm having that debate, not just from a technology perspective, and of course I'm thinking about the how, like how am I going to solve this problem? But the what am I solving and why? And then again, it goes back to that impact. Really having that impact statement decided upon as I go into whatever solution set I'm looking into, because then I have some guardrails that will guide those discussions.
I'll answer that question in two parts. Being a technologist, when you talk about standards and regulations, it often comes across as something that slows us down. From experience, I can say it's otherwise. I come from a telecom background, and if you've heard of International Telecommunication Union, they've set standards and protocols so that we could talk to anyone from across the world. Look at it that way. So it helps us collaborate. It helps provide transparency. And I believe standards and regulations are enablers rather than those that really slow us down.
So these standards that we've often kind of modelled after from the IEEE and from various other bodies before have often, and I think you touched on this, Tris, it's somewhat technical. What we, I think, are talking about in this domain, though, is that we don't just need technical standards, or at least those will be taken care of by the technical people. But from a Christian perspective, we're also looking for the ethical and the moral standards. Are there examples of how we codify that stuff?
Well, you could ask and look at the EU AI Act. So we've got in Europe, not including the UK, or it might be in Northern Ireland though, watch that space. The EU AI Act is looking to delineate what is kind of high-risk AI and what is medium risk, and essentially what it considers not risky, but could well be risky. But through that, it has demanded a set of standards. And through those standards, they're being created at the moment by a whole body of international national standards bodies. So I represent the British Standards Institute in that fora as well. And the International Standards Organisation, it's all those bodies that come together that represent the national bodies. But we're together creating through an organisation, another organisation of standards that you may never have heard of, called CEN-CENELEC, a whole set of standards that are designed towards the EU AI Act. Now, why would I mention the EU AI Act? Because EU AI Act started its journey as an ethical response. The EU wanted its European values to be embedded in an EU AI Act. It brought together a high-level expert group of AI experts from all different disciplines to come together and think about some high-level requirements, which were values and principles, that it wanted to kind of embed in the EU AI Act. And so that's actually been a guiding principle, if you like, all these 7 requirements that were brought about through the high-level expert group into the EU AI Act and EU Act standards making. However, before the EU Act came along, IEEE, back in 2016, started a path onto ethically aligned design, whereby we have created, and I've been part and parcel of creating, a number of standards that are looking at various different ethical values. Now, these have been created outside the context of Christianity. So with no particular moral foundation to it, but they discuss things like, what does ethically aligned design mean? What does it mean to design and develop and deploy, and ultimately potentially then go on to monitor and decommission an AI system with values, as a values base. So there's IEEE 7000 as a standard. Then you've got IEEE 7001, which is to do with transparency, 7002 to do with data privacy, 7003, algorithmic bias and non-discrimination. And the list goes on, right up until emerging empathy in robotics, which I think is 70.14, which we're currently in the process of, I think got developed last year. And so there's a variety of those, but these are just the start. These are voluntary standards, and they are with a values base that brings together a whole multitude of different voices of people of different cultures, different contexts, thinking about the AI technology in a number of different varieties and guises, not one particular context. And we know context and culture matters. We've heard about that already. And we know that from our moral foundations, from our Christian values foundations, our Christian beliefs matter. And so what does that look like in terms of standards? What does that look like in terms of offering some level of credibility and credulity and authenticity and integrity and, last but not least, accountability for us when we're looking to use and produce and also consume these AI tools? And that's where a lot of our work with AI and faith is starting.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these frameworks, they kind of all use the same kind of words, and I've got some of the ones that we've looked at here. Privacy, you mentioned, transparency, accountability. Most of these things actually can find a biblical Christian root because the ethics that they've emerged from are obviously Christian, particularly for most of them. They've come from kind of Western democracies. I think it's Tom Holland talks about this thing in his book Dominion, about that we can't really exist outside of Christendom, whether or not you believe you're a kind of Christian country or not. Privacy, talks about the sanctity of the individual. Inclusivity is this point around we're all equal and created in God's image. So when we try and kind of get practical about this stuff, for you guys in a ministry context, how are you thinking about framing how we use AI practically inside of a ministry? Like, what's even the process that other colleagues here might need to go on to do that?
I can start off by talking about data. You're all familiar with the GDPR regulations that are in place. When we as an organization started thinking about standards on data, we took all these regulations that are already available and we built a layer on top of it, which is even more stringent, which provides more transparency, keeping in mind all the biblical principles and aspects. I think if we don't lead in this space, we're running out of time. Someone's going to start dictating terms for us. And there is an urgency for us to start work on this and not just keep talking about this. I believe this is at least the third time in the last 2 years I've been in a conversation where we're still talking about standards. Like Dr. Lennox mentioned, what are we going to do about it? And some of our leadership is involved in setting these standards. They're working with other organizations. So if you would be part of it, please reach out to us. It's time that we put something practically in place and not just keep talking about it. These are very critical questions to answer. When we started working on chatbots about 8 years ago, we asked questions like, can a bot pray? Is it biblical? Is it correct for a bot to pray? And we will only get answers to these when we raise these questions. And these questions will only arise when we work on these. And we can only solve these by having conversations with the right group in the room. So I would encourage us not just to talk about it, but start working on it. I believe there are others that are already doing some work on it. How can we work alongside them? How can we leverage what's already in place? And how can we put this into practice?
So I think that's part of the role of missional AI, right? That we're all sitting here together, and we've worked. You mentioned AI and faith and the ethically aligned design project, which I participated in. I think that this is like the moment, right? This is like the moment where we need to put the rubber to the road. But I'm gonna be just really practical right here when we think about how do organizations approach AI. One of the things I would definitely recommend is that you have a philosophical approach to AI. So it's not just a piece of technology, right? It embodies meaning. So is your organization talking about AI at its highest level? You mentioned, can a bot pray? You should have a point of view. You might have the point of view that you can use AI agents to pray with people. That might be the point of view of your organization, and that's totally fine. But you need to understand the why, right? And you need to be able to articulate that. So at Global Media Outreach, I started actually with the ethics and the philosophy, and did a white paper and socialized that within the organization to get feedback. And that was very, very helpful. We have online missionaries all over the world. I wanted to hear from them. We're empowering your ministry. If we were to utilize AI, would that, in your mind, impact you? So that's that kind of like impact assessment piece. And then not just the philosophy, start thinking about what do you do today. A lot of organizations do not have their processes or what they do cataloged. Well, you've got this great thing like called ChatGPT. You can talk to it and it'll create diagrams for you, workflows, things like that. So understanding what do you do? What is it you do? Why do you do it? And what may be appropriate for AI, and then involve people within the organization. And that's really worked well for us because we're building AI fluency. It can't be just the tech people or the ethics and the legal aspect. It needs to be AI for all.
Well, I mean, we've been doing a lot of work with businesses and ministries recently, doing these AI ethics audits and helping put together policies. Just out of interest, how many of you, if you work for a ministry, just raise a hand if you've already written an AI ethics statement or you've written a policy of some description of AI ethics? Okay, so I'm going to say that's probably still the minority, but it's good to see that some have written them. I mean, just to be kind of practical about it, I mean, how do ministries start doing this work? Like, where do we really begin? I don't know, Tricia, have you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, we've got to start with the why, absolutely. Just because we can doesn't mean to say we should. It's also thinking about where does your ministry, where does your organisation sit within, dare I say, the AI life cycle? Are you producing this or are you consuming this? Because if you're consuming it, you might not have a lot of choice potentially about what you then bring into your organisation, but you've got to be critical of it and really think about what that means to your organisation. So, an ethics statement may well be, or kind of ethical position may well be, from a provider's perspective, when you're creating AI, what actually goes as that golden thread throughout your organisation, and that you can then start to say, well, hey, here's some standards about this. How on earth can I apply this with this values basis rather than the world's value basis that I'm being presented with? But then if you're a church or a parachurch ministry and you're consuming this, it's like, how can you critique, how can you critically think and approach these organisations that are providing you with AI systems on the basis of your own theological thinking? Because it's just so easy just to take, accept, go on to ChatGPT, use it, go and use Claude, Gemini, any other large language model or GPT that's available to you, without really thinking about with a deeper level of spiritual maturity, what it is that you're actually deploying in your organisation and how it is you're using it. And so actually, I'm kind of wanting to see this from both the provider's perspective, in the sense of what kinds of standards, what kinds of protocols, what kinds of things ought you be thinking about and putting in place and documenting and doing proper responsible AI. But then equally, as a church or a parachurch ministry, how do you know that what you're buying in, what you're bringing into your organisation aligns with your values, is furthering your values, is furthering your mission, the Great Command and Great Commission, and then also is aligned with your own guidelines and your own vision and mission as well. And you won't do that unless you've got procurement tools in place and other things that you are setting against this. Because it's not only about, your vision and mission, that this must be aligned, but there's also the quality that you're buying in, and having the appropriate literacy within your organisation, AI literacy, data literacy, to then be able to use it and use it wisely with digital wisdom so that you can govern it well. Because we have to be responsible for the things that we're utilising, and the buck stops with us.
I'm guessing that many of you in the room have come because you're excited about AI, you want to do something with it in your mission and business, but that's not always a guarantee that everyone's on board with that. So maybe just from both of you, how do you go about kind of buying in and building consensus within teams around using some of this stuff when it's new, perhaps when there isn't already a set of clear guidance coming from an authority outside of the business or the organisation? How do you build consensus?
Well, I'll tell you what worked for us, and I've seen replicated other places. So first of all, being an engineer, I'm insanely curious. Everybody's really shocked, right? Those of you in the room that are engineers. So I looked to see how Fortune 500 companies were addressing this issue. So besides the white paper that talks about philosophy, I went to the board of directors and I said, here's my white paper, here's the philosophical framework with the scriptures. I need you to tell me as the tech leader, where are my boundaries? And they said, well, we trust you, go do what you think is best. And I said, oh no, I need a level of accountability. So we also put together a technology advisory board. So these are people with appropriate expertise, legal, ethical, et cetera. And so there's basically 2 layers of accountability for me in my role as CTO. So everything that we're planning to do is going through those bodies. In addition, we have an AI task force of people from across the organization. And no, these are people that are brilliant, great critical thinkers, but they're maybe not AI positive. Like, how do I use AI? I don't even care, but it's really that DNA carrying, right? How do we get the average individual in your organization to care about AI? Because it's not if it'll impact them, it's when. So those have been really good moves for us. And I love the conversations that are being started, and now people are owning the conversation in the organization.
Can I just add to that? I'd say it starts with AI literacy. All of us have our own way of interpreting what AI is, what AI can do, what AI cannot do. And we know whether we know it or like it or not. Most folks in our organizations are already leveraging AI. I think it's important for us to get them on the same page in terms of what is possible and what is not possible, where to use AI, where not to use AI. And as a framework, I would suggest listing the risks and prioritizing them. We can't go after every problem that is going to come out of AI. We have to look at critical risks and go after them first. We're talking about LLMs. How many LLMs that we know that we use are built on a Christian worldview? And I think it's important for us to go after the big ones first, the critical aspects first, and then we can have governance, we can have other organization-wide, say, regulations in place for protecting our PII and some of the other, addressing some of the other adverse effects of AI.
As we come into land, there's been some great work being done by AI and Faith, who I'm sure many of you may be familiar with that organisation, but a particular subset of us working on some work around that. Trish, you just want to kind of give a bit of a plug to that as we go into lunch?
Yeah, so at AI Faith, we're trying to bring together a variety of multidisciplinary expertise, helping to actually leverage something that I helped create with IEEE called IEEE Certified. It's a framework to help ethically assess AI systems. Now, I've already said that was baselined in ethically aligned design, but what we want to do is take that forward and really think about it deeply from a theological perspective. So we're partnering with theological institutions like Dallas Theology Seminary. I'm also part of the Oxford Collaboration on Theology and AI out of the Ian Ramsdale Centre. And so really working with a number of theologians as well as lawyers and those who are engineers as well to try and bring together what can we leverage that's already in the world, like IEEE Certified, and the whole suite of IEEE ethically aligned design standards, amongst other standards that are available, and put these into perspective that has a Christian values base, a theological grounding and a theological foundation. So we're working from the ground up so that when the company is applying these as a provider of AI, that a person or an organisation, a church or parachurch ministry that's buying this in when they're consuming it can truly think about, okay, I can see this organisation has thought about this responsibly, they've thought about this theologically, they've perhaps even provided a level of guidance and extra literacy for us as an organisation, how do we implement this, but actually then understanding the theological basis. But in order to do that, this is not something that's already pull out of the hat and that ChatGPT or others can create for us. This is something we're going to have with humans at the centre, we're going to build, and we are in the process of building. We're looking actually to run a design sprint later this year, hopefully out of the US. Also, we are socialising this out at the World Evangelical Alliance conference out in South Korea later this year. So we're hoping to have a lot of more church and parachurch ministries on board to think about what this means for you and for your ministries, and how certification and standards that sit behind that can help you understand and have greater literacy for AI.
Fantastic. I'm sure for many of you who have thought about kind of standards in the past, or you've been involved in movements like Fair Trade or B Corp, will understand that this can actually not just be a kind of thing that holds things back, but it's really an enabler and a real opportunity for us as well as ministries to stand up and say that we as the church should have the best answer on how AI should be used. And so that's why we're excited about getting involved with this. We're going to go into the lunch break now. I'm going to welcome Gareth back to kind of set us up for that. But thank you very much to the panel and for your attention. If you'd like to get involved, come and see Trish at the break.
Thank you.